I'm just going to take 30 seconds to introduce myself, Malcolm Goggin. I'm a professor of practice over at ASU. I teach mostly online and almost exclusively the capstone course within our master's program. This capstone course is the last course that Masters of Public Administration or Masters of Public Policy students take. And in this particular project, there are a total of 4 students who did 9 case studies. They looked at 9 different cities to try to find out if there's something about those cities that could be shared with Apache Junction. We worked closely with Larry and Matt, and met on campus or in the city a couple of times, and also met together as a class. So I'd like to start by just introducing Deborah Maginani, sorry, who was, as I said, we had a total of 9 cities, and Deborah did 2 of those 9.
Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be with you today. I'm looking forward to sharing what we found. I'll be starting, and then my colleague, Thomas Toon, will be coming in about halfway through the presentation. So let's get into it. Okay, basically, our project involved 2 different heaps. One was a situational analysis, which looked at the examination of several factors that Apache Junction city officials had brought to us that they saw as looming problems, threats, or just something that they wanted more in-depth knowledge on. The other one was for us to do case studies. This involved the Apache Junction officials facilitating access to peer cities. I did the town of Queen Creek and Oro Valley, found the experience extremely gratifying. They were both very gracious with their time and knowledge, and so hopefully we'll learn a lot through this process. So first of all, I'm going to start with the situational analysis. Basically, this was a large literature review that I did. What I found was that e-commerce is rapidly growing, representing 13% of all retail sales in 2017 and $436 billion in total sales. It also grew in 2017 by 16%. I was just telling Professor Goggin that just last week I happened to be watching C-SPAN, which I love to watch, sorry. There was a case before the Supreme Court, South Dakota versus Wayfair, where they're discussing this very problem, bringing back into the forefront the Quill versus North Dakota decision by the Supreme Court that happened in the 1960s. And basically what I took, to make it short, what I took from the responses from the Chief Supreme Court Justice was that he feels like the problem is declining because more and more you're finding the online stores have a physical presence in the state. But basically, and the more liberal justices felt that Congress was a better vehicle to address this issue. And there just happens to be a bipartisan, 2 bipartisan pieces of legislation moving through the House and the Senate currently. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that, because the research does show that a federal response is needed. Another major finding was the volatility of state taxes. This creates uncertainty for local governments. In one of my interviews, they stated that a possible threat to local governments are actions by the state legislatures that will affect the way that they can collect their local revenues. More specifically, this would include any changes to the tax code that would eliminate the local government's use to calculate how taxes are reported or creating exclusionary categories. And then the last threat that they wanted us to examine was the Santan Valley Incorporation. From what I found, this looks like it may be less of a threat right now than it appeared more recently. There was a disagreement over the boundaries of incorporation. And although the Arizona legislature has made incorporation easier, it looks like Santan Valley is having to go back to the drawing table. Queen Creek also annexed some of the very critical revenue generators, and that tended to slow down the process a bit. That is an important threat because it would reduce Apache Junction's revenue by $1 million. That's a significant threat. So the methodology that I used for data collection was in-depth review of town websites, budgets, CAFRs, and then, like I mentioned before, in-person meetings with the assistant to town manager, accounting manager, and senior financial services analyst with the town of Green Creek. The town of Oro Valley, I kind of hit them at the wrong time. They were busy working on their budget. So, but their finance director was very, very kind to communicate with me through email extensively. So my findings for the town of Green Creek, they utilize a 4% local sales tax. This represents 54% of all the revenue allocated to the general fund. And 70% of the 4% goes to the general fund. They have a limited property tax, and this is the only town of the two that does have a property tax. In 2007, they approved a $1.95 property tax rate, 100% of it allocated to the Emergency Management Services Fund. I did find a difference in the Parks and Recreation fee structure. They do theirs based on residency status, so they have very different fees based on non-residents, residents, and then they also break it down by commercial versus nonprofit for businesses. Just one example of this is the charges for the field prep for soccer. It's $91 for residents and $137 for non-residents. So that's like a $47, $46 difference. So that's fairly significant. And that's across all their programs in their Parks and Recreation. In my discussions with the town of Green Creek officials, we discussed the problem of unfunded liability. In 2016, a task force was formed in Queen Creek. The outcomes of this was they decided that they were going to view this liability as debt. And so at the end of the year, they write a check to cover the funding gaps in the PSRPS. They also brought this to the forefront during my meeting, so I wanted to relay this to all of you. They stressed that they felt like purchasing their water rights was crucial to their broader general plan. It gives them greater control over service fees and has a positive impact on revenue. As Larry stated, Apache Junction has one privately held water company and a water district serving 14,000 residents. My findings for the town of Oro Valley, they have a 2.5% local sales tax, 6% lodging tax, and that's going to be increasing to 8% this year, and then an additional 4% tax on construction and utility services. Now, the 2% of the 2.5% local sales tax, as well as the 4% utility, are used for various governmental purposes. Beginning in 2015, the additional 0.5% local sales tax began being used for funding the town's community center operations. Oro Valley began to deliver reclaimed water in 2005 through the Central Arizona Project CAP water in 2012. This resulted in a 50% reduction in well water use, serving to protect and preserve the town's groundwater for future generations. The town of Oro Valley also, their finance director also stressed their desire and their history of utilizing public and private partnerships. They mentioned the Children's Museum of Oro Valley. This is a STEAM museum, not a STEM museum, standing for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics, and it was paid for by the town of Oro Valley, the Children's Museum of Tucson, and through community donations. She expressed to me that they are continuously looking to expand their partnerships whenever possible with the county, with tourism agencies, and other surrounding entities, believing that partnerships allow the town to leverage shared resources. So based on my case studies, the recommendations that I am putting forth for the city of Apache Junction are to create a resident, non-resident fee structure, and also a business, commercial nonprofit structure for their Parks and Recreation services that could potentially bring in quite a bit of revenue. Review their user fees annually. And possibly look at filling any unmet service needs in the community as far as recreation for the 55-plus winter residents that they have. I know that Queen Creek, for example, created a whole preschool program for their young families that are moving into the area, and they've had quite a bit of success with that. Another thing that came up with Queen Creek that they are doing is they refinanced 2 large loans, resulting in significant savings on interest. So the last one is explore public-private partnerships and invest in recreation, as stated before. One thing on this note that I wanted to stress was that in the Queen Creek Parks and Recreation 2017 Master Plan, it states that the funds for their expanding parks and recreation could come from other revenue sources such as water, transportation, and wastewater accounts. So they're not limiting themselves in that respect. And then the last recommendation is continue planning and review of revenue policies, possibly explore the feasibility of purchasing water rights, annually review revenue management and policy, and diversify retail base by drawing in establishments that are immune to e-commerce. What I found in my research on e-commerce is that not all types of businesses are as susceptible as others. Research has shown that establishments like the Child's Place, Lowe's, Home Depot, and then other types of businesses are more immune to e-commerce than others. And thank you very much. I will now bring up Thomas.
Hello, my name is Thomas Toon. I'm also an MPA candidate working on my capstone under the instruction of Dr. Goggin. So my case study started out by trying to understand the situation before seeking for solutions. So with the guidance of the project organizers, I investigated the online sales trend on revenues and investigated demographics of the city and analyzed compared revenues between the 3 cities. Having some understanding of Apache Junction, I then dove into exploration of the revenue sources in the 2 peer cities, focusing on 2 general revenue categories, which are licenses and permits, and the other category is charges for services. My data, I took my data from 2008 to 2017 CAFRs, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports for all 3 cities. I also took my data from open sources online from the 2 peer cities and other sources from the federal websites. The 2 peer cities that I studied was on Avondale and Mesa. And as you can see, they're not exactly peer cities. Mesa's got almost 500,000, 500,000 people, and Apache Junction around 40,000 people. The other graph there is the population growth through the period that I was studying. The median household income is also very different. You got of Avondale and Mesa above 50,000, and Apache Junction under 40. These graphs show the trend of the permits and licenses revenues These are actual revenue trends. As you can see in the top graphs there is Avondale and Mesa, and they have exceeded their 2008 permits and licenses levels. And Apache Junction is not doing too good as of 2017. And these are the other category, the charges for services. And it's this pretty much almost the same story. The Apache Junction graph is down below and doesn't look good either. These are just some examples of some of the analysis that I had to do in my second phase of the project, which is to go into all the revenue, every transaction, and the two peer cities, and select the most frequent transactions, revenue source, and also the revenue source with the highest amount per transaction. And the third criteria is the revenue source with the highest sum in a given time frame. The results of the demographic analysis found that Apache Junction had a much lower median income, as I showed you, and a regression analysis found that population does affect revenue. Furthermore, revenue levels for Apache Junction has not reached the 2008 levels. As we're finding ideal revenue sources in Avondale, Mesa, we provided a matrix of applicable revenue sources with most frequent transactions, highest average amount transactions, and the highest sum collected in the time frame. Those are all available in the report. In conclusion, I would like to point out that due to the low median household income, fees should be progressive in design to reflect those who are willing to pay and those who cannot afford to pay. Fee rates should not be decreased due to their downward trend since 2008. Further analysis and modification of the effective revenue sources, which was provided in the report, are needed so the aforementioned points are inclusive in their replication process. The impacts of the online shopping trend may not be offset by the portion of general revenue generated by these fees, but by improving these revenue sources, cities become better prepared for tomorrow by covering costs today. Thank you.